All right, good morning. We're live, so welcome to this morning's discussion of the Seinfeld episode, the Pony Remark. So, where would the group like to start?
Good morning. Red team's in the other conference room. We want to.
I thought the dinner party was a funny part of the episode where Jerry and Elaine were like quite obviously being sarcastic and seeming to mess with the other people, and no one was really understanding.
No, like cultural like missteps, right? He makes this like statement that in his mind is a joke, but ends up like really talking about like her immigrant journey and her like cultural differences in a way that really hurt her.
And I think it's one thing that you'll see is a repeating theme here, pretty much led by Jerry, but certainly all four core characters do tend to be egocentric, right? So I think, and I'm not sure this will actually appear discreetly on a shelf exam, but egocentrism is something that you'll need to identify in clinical practice. It's defined as the incapacity of an individual's perspective being from anyone's or about anyone's other than their own, right? So that's ego. Now, it's perfectly normal when age appropriate, so that you should not expect a 5-year-old to understand how you feel or the bigger picture, so to speak. But certainly we have 4 adult characters here, and they just don't read the room, and that's something you'll see as very pervasive. Now, there really is no specificity when it comes to egocentrism. You can't say, okay, I've uncovered egocentrism. It looks like it's clinically significant, and that line that is always operationalized as some form of dysfunction, occupational, etc. And therefore, the person must have blank. You're not going to get that linear relationship between the deficit and the mental disorder. All right, but certainly it is a risk factor for developing future mental illness nonetheless. And that's something, of course, we'll bring back to this discussion every episode, every week, right? That's number one. And then the other thing you'll see is that part of their collective egocentricity is they're, again, not reading the room in this case with regard to what is culturally sanctioned. They're actually chronophobic. They just don't appreciate the way someone who is a generation, in this case, 2 generations, maybe, well, a generation ahead of them, before them, may actually experience the same topic. They're missing that. And again, you'll see this as a pervasive pattern. So just to take a step back and kind of repackage what I said, because clinically this is a major pearl now, right? I think anytime you meet a patient, whether it's the next 5 weeks or ever, I want you to really train yourself to put your position, to put yourself in a position of unconditional positive regard, right? Irrespective of why the patient made an appointment to see you, right? And that goes for psychiatry, that goes for any non-psychiatric practice. I think in the way our healthcare system is set up, certainly with a tertiary care model, 99 times out of 100, the person is going to have a problem, right? It's the reason why they actually called and made an appointment to see you. Nonetheless, I want your brain to be hardwired or rewired to always approach a situation with unconditional positive regard, irrespective of your patient's chief complaint. Once you move off that starting point, I want you to recognize what would be considered to be abnormal. All right, so this is outside of a culturally sanctioned norm. And only when you then identify, now step 3, that abnormality results in clinically significant distress or impairment in self or others, can you use the word disorder, right, in psychiatry. And that D word usually follows every single mental illness published in the DSM, right? So those are the 3 discrete steps. And we could apply that to Seinfeld. We could certainly apply it to films like The Babadook, like we will at our noon conference. But you could also apply it to every patient encounter too. Right, so just keep that in the back of your mind, and I want you to think through those 3 steps, and at some point it'll click and they'll just come naturally to you. Right. All right. Other observations here. The Pony Remark.
I was thinking about when he had, I think he had a game at the same time as the funeral, and he was like considering not going or something like that, but then ended up
raining anyway. I think
Mhm.
it's like, I guess the irony of the symbolism.
Any take on the symbolism?
Not really sure. I just thought it was, yeah, just funny that you really want to feel bad.
I feel like it kind of goes back to his ego too, because he thinks he's like the best player on the team at one point, you know, like he don't talk about his contributions to the team. And like George kind of like, you know, validates that and like agrees that he needs to go. And then when he does go, he's like the worst player and they lose.
That's very true. That's very true. The other thing I want you to pick up on here is this idea of anxiety. And the idea of risk factors and therefore risk factors that are both modifiable and unmodifiable. Because you're going to have to assess this balance between those risk factors and protective factors to come up with an overall assessment. And when you put together a treatment plan, your focus obviously may be twofold. Number one is the cumulative effect of all of those risk factors weighed with those protective factors. So overall risk. I think arbitrarily you should adopt modest, intermediate, high, and then imminent. Right now, again, we could change the adjectives, but basically 4 levels of severity. When you put together a treatment plan, always safety first. So if imminent, then you're going to go in a direction that is much different than if not imminent. Right. On the other hand, if you're looking at folks, and now the imminent risk is fairly straightforward. You want to put an individual in an environment that is restrictive for their safety, right? So voluntary inpatient psychiatric hospitalization would be one simple example of that. What is a little bit more complicated is the non-imminent risk, because there you're going to have to put together a treatment plan that is outpatient, and there's risk with that, right? Especially if you're misguided, if your assessment is off, right? So it's a little bit more complicated. One of the things that I want you to think through is looking at a treatment plan that would identify the modifiable risk factors, because they're the ones, of course, you can change through treatment planning and therefore improve your patient's overall health. And of course, mitigate that risk, intermediate risk, high risk, whatever. I think Jerry's take on this is very metaphorical. He has no control over it. Right. And at some point, acknowledging it's either going to stay clear or it's not, and how that might impact things moving forward is something that he has to kind of give up as something that is beyond. Now, there's something called a serenity prayer. I would actually ask you to look it up because it's very worthwhile in identifying those things that you can and can't change and how that affects you. Yeah. Yeah. Because when individuals actually become very hyper-focused, maybe even obsessed on those things that they can't change, you're going to see that they're placing themselves at risk for anxiety. Now, I know that's a little bit of a different take here because he wasn't necessarily worried that his game was going to get rained out. And what do I do? It's quite the opposite, but certainly there's some irony. And Jerry, by the way, just happens to have a condition in which he really does feel a sense, an overwhelming need for control. Other observations?
So forgive me because I'm very new to Seinfeld. I don't know all the characters' names, but in the cafe, Kramer had this like moment of like a realization of his own mortality that I thought was like humorous, how it came up and like the context of it just out of nowhere almost.
How'd it come up?
I don't remember. I just that really stood out to me. Right.
Mortality. I think that's George. Yeah, but
It's George.
yeah.
Okay. So I guess so not totally out of nowhere, but like it felt almost out of proportion.
Well, what's interesting is that he kind of changed his subject, but it kept bringing it back to death, and then finally he was like, yeah, I'm gonna die. And so I think it shows kind of like his defenses, or like to try to redirect. And no one was willing to like do that with him, so he went complete opposite and like full way. Yeah.
Yep. You'll see spirituality play a fairly pervasive theme in this situational comedy. It does come up from time to time, and it's a fair constant. And given the age that every one of these core characters right now is at, that's meaningful, right? So we could look at this in an Ericksonian perspective. They're all middle-aged, which means that they're at what Ericksonian stage of psychosocial development. Generativity, right? Right, so that's generative. If generativity is achieved, looking in the mirror and saying, "Is this it? Is this everything that I dreamed of? Have all my dreams come to fulfillment?" If the answer is no, what happens? What's the default of generativity? Stagnation, yeah, otherwise known as the midlife crisis. And all four characters are there. Only one is successful. And I mean, even though you might chart success in one way for these characters, certainly there's other aspects of their life in which they are, let's just say, sub-threshold, right? And that drives everything forward here. That actually drives the narrative of the situational comedy itself. Right? Just for completeness sake, if they were able to successfully achieve generativity, what's that eighth and final stage of this epigenetic theory of Erik Erikson?
It's like this, this is, I forgot the word, but it basically, they look back in their life and they feel like they've actually.
Yeah.
I forgot the word.
Ego integrity.
Yeah.
Right. And if not, despair, which of course is geriatric depression.
Yeah.
Which now we move to the other observation of inconsistency in Jerry's sense. Like I don't know a lot of them, but I'm Florida all the time in New Zealand, and so seeing his dad also like hyper focus on the plane ticket and like money at this big stage in life is really interesting. Like you can see that.
Yeah.
I
I think that would be a regression. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Yep. And we're going to see this too, just in a bit of a broader context, and that is both the Costanzas and the Seinfelds, the parents, do play prominent roles in this comedy over the 9 seasons. And you could get glimpses into the early childhood experiences of 2 of those 4 main characters. Now, the absence of Kramer's parents, of Elaine's parents, is just as telling. And each episode we'll have a chance to visit that as well.
Going off of that, I thought in the beginning you saw like the interplay and dynamic of the parents' relationships, and they were both kind of like antagonizing each other, like pushing each other to the edge before they were like given to do something.
Yeah. And you know, it's probably safe to assume that when Jerry was growing up, that was in place as well. This idea that just happened or started last week, and that Jerry was brought up in a very nurturing, loving environment without chaos, is probably would be off the mark for a clinician.
Well,
Right.
Jerry was thought they did very consistent to the human, so people thought everything is human. His career now, so he does.
Right. That brings us right back to the initial observation of sarcasm.
Mhm.
Sarcasm gets them in trouble. So, and I do want to reflect upon this a little bit, because I think the way the defense mechanisms are taught to medical students, the future physicians, is a little misguided, because we stick with the original conceptualization per Valiant, and that there are mature, immature, narcissistic defenses. And to some extent, that's true. But what's much more relevant is the adaptability and the functionality of a defense, whether they're mature or immature. So they're either adaptable or they're not. And maladaptive defenses get you in trouble, even the most mature ones. So in the original system, for example, humor is considered to be a mature defense. But you'll see in this situational comedy that it often gets Jerry in trouble. Sarcasm got him in trouble, despite the fact that it's a mature defense as per the original classification. And so in this case, it wouldn't be adaptable, right? It'd be maladaptive. I'm using big words here. What are defense mechanisms? We're using humor or sarcasm as an example, but we should probably talk a little bit about what these are in the first place.
Like a programmed response to deal with tough things going on in their life.
To
Or
deal.
not tough, but not normal.
Right. right? So let's break that down a little bit, to deal with, to cope. And then let's talk a little bit more about quote unquote tough things in one's life. What would Freud say, you're packaging there? What are those tough things in our life? And you don't have to give me examples, I'm talking generalities.
You would say it's like a reflection, like something from your past that you just never dealt with.
Certainly an example of it, a very common example of
Like ego dysfunction.
it. Again, another example, a little bit of a broader example. When I heard the word ego just stated, it's unfair for us to say that, me repeat that, and not actually define what it is I'm talking about. So what is it that I'm talking about? And the full terminology of this are the ego defense mechanisms. So all of a sudden, this example of repression, humor, seem to be a function of the ego. That's true, but it's the right. So the ego is a component of our personality. Ego is a component of our personality, our subconscious or unconscious. There, I use those two terms interchangeably. It's unfair. I probably shouldn't. Freudian, Jungian would kick down the door and say, "What are you doing?" But I think for our level of education and learning, I think it's okay, at least today. All right. All right. So we have the ego. All right. So what are the other components of our personality?
Super ego and the id,
Right. So what's the it?
to like your desires.
No. The id is that component of our personality that houses our basic instincts. Right. Another, again, component of our subconscious or unconscious. These impulses cannot come to conscious awareness. They're way too threatening. Right. Which is why we have a superego. Right. We have a guard or governor that prevents those impulses from coming into consciousness. Unfortunately, that sets us up to be anxious, right? Anxiety is nothing more than the friction caused between what we want to do and what we have to do, our id versus our superego, right? So I'll give you an example, easy example. Right now, everyone is anxious because there's no way you could convince me that of the 10,000 things that you can be doing right now, your number one choice would be sit at this table on a Friday, decent weather out. It's only going to get nicer today. Well, it's going to rain, but which is apropos not only for this episode, but for our movie at noon, which is why I actually chose it to. Still, nonetheless, if you are shaking your head and nodding and saying, no, Toby, you got this. We want to be here. Well, that's your superego. Right. So your superego setting this up in a way that is certainly in direct opposition to what your id really wants to do. But yet I'm looking in your eyes and not seeing that much anxiety. Right. But this is the very definition of anxiety, the friction between the id and the superego. So why isn't it our reality that you're anxious? Because I'm really looking at you guys. You guys seem pretty composed. Yeah, absolutely. So your ego has taken over, and through these subconscious processes called the ego defense mechanisms, you have dissipated your anxiety, right? Because your ego defenses are adaptable. They're adaptive. They're working. And that breaks down, of course, things go in a different direction. Right. So again, that's Freud in 4 minutes or less. Right? But you'll see this applied not only in our discussions every Friday morning, not only in our film discussions every afternoon, but in patient encounters as well. All right, over 20 minutes after the hour. Any final observations in the Pony Remark?
Back to the conversation about death and spirits in the diner. I thought it was interesting that George kind of shows a little bit of like his thoughts about his own life when he's like, if I was a spirit, there's no chance I'm going to my own funeral. I'd be in a different dimension, making it seem like he has something better coming.
Right. So thoughts about that?
I think it goes back to like being unfulfilled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like a child, and instead of him being in the here and now and being able to verbalize his inadequacies, he is almost like play therapy with puppets. You're giving him the permission to be a spirit, and if you were a spirit, what would you do? And in that make-believe land, he's able to tell you how unfulfilled he is. Right, and you know, this is something that you've identified as early as the first discussion of our first week. You're going to see this again as a very pervasive pattern in this particular character. He is very unfulfilled. He has not achieved generativity. All right, we'll leave it here. Again, I think the tagline from the Babadook is, "I think it's going to rain." So we'll keep consistent with that line and be back around, I think noon. We'll shoot for noon, probably in the larger room for our movie discussion. See everybody back then.